The Dallas Cowboys are yet again having a terrible free agency. So in this video, I want to talk about why the Dallas Cowboys are unintentionally ruining their future with their terrible free agencies. Subscribe if you're new, let's hop into it. So as you guys all know, the Dallas Cowboys are typically not big spenders in free agency, and even though they've been maybe unusually active during the free agency process, they've been unusually active in pursuing not very good players. Now I want to say this, they're picking up some solid pieces here and there. Not every move that they have made has been a disaster, because here's a good post made by John Machota. He's a really big guy involved with Dallas. They've made some good moves. Bringing in Javonte Williams I thought was a fine move. He's a decent running back 3/2 option. I like the move for Jack Sanborn. I think he's a hell of a player who fits the system obviously that Dallas is going to be running. They've made some really good re-signings like Osa Digizua and Kavonte Turpin. But then you look down here, Zach Martin, retired, future Hall of Famer. DeMarcus Lawrence, who by the way is going on a rampage against his former Cowboys teammates, calling the Dallas Cowboys a bit essentially soft, and that the fact they're not going to win a championship. And then you have Trevon Diggs, Osa, and Micah Parsons feuding with him on Twitter. It's kind of crazy right now. They lose out on one of the best slot corners in the NFL and arguably their most consistent corner on this team in Jordan Lewis. They lose Chauncey Golston. They lose Rico Dowdle. They lose their swing tackle. Like, these are important pieces, and who have they replaced them with? Essentially first round busts. Solomon Thomas, first round bust. Kenneth Murray, maybe not necessarily a bust, but probably hasn't been worthy of that first round pick. Kaiir Elam, total bust. Miles Sanders, not a first round bust, but was terrible for the Panthers and a terrible contract. Peyton Turner, first round bust. Oh, and not to mention, they also spent a 4th round pick on Jonathan Mingo to hypothetically be their wide receiver 2 next to CeeDee Lamb, but obviously that's not going to work out because we all could read the room, the fact that Jonathan Mingo is just not a very good player. So now you look at this depth chart for the Dallas Cowboys, and I gotta be honest with you, I think this team is just not very good. Dak Prescott's a hell of a quarterback, but you look at his supporting cast, and outside of CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson, it's really not that good right now. Your running backs are Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, who, for full transparency, I think aren't going to be their full-time starters. I do think they will draft a running back, but let's just keep it a buck here. I think that Rico Dowdle is clearly a better running back than both those guys, and if you take the contracts that both Javonte and Miles Sanders have, I'm sure it would come really close to the $6.5 million that Rico Dowdle got paid. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think that Rico should have been their starting running back heading into 2025, but I do think that he showed enough flashes last year for you to feel confident that he can play his best football moving forward. Hell, he got 1,000 yards last year and really wasn't the full-time running back till like halfway through the season. So hypothetically speaking, if Rico Dowdle was the full-time, 20 carries a game type guy from week 1, he probably could have had like 1,200, 1,300 rushing yards last year, and we're talking about somebody as being, a really good running back 1 for your team. So the fact they let him out the door, and by the way, he went to Carolina, which doesn't make much sense for Rico either, to, go from being an RB1 to clearly an RB2, and then, I don't know, I don't like the move. For me, I thought that Dallas would bring him back. Dallas opted not to. Instead, they go with the guy in Javonte Williams, who has struggled with injuries in years past, and most recently this year really was a okay RB2 for the Broncos. And then Miles Sanders basically got played off the field by Chuba Hubbard and essentially became like a RB3 for the freaking Carolina Panthers. So again, I do think Dallas will draft a running back, but right now I don't feel really confident about that running room right now. And then you look at the receiving core. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb is one of the best receivers in the NFL. I'd probably put him like 3rd, 4th, or 5th on the entire NFL in terms of receivers. Then you got Jalen Tolbert, who I think is a quality wide receiver 3/4, and then Kavonte Turpin. And one of the biggest things that I've been saying about this Dallas Cowboys teams for, it feels like years now, ever since they got rid of Amari Cooper, was this team needs to find ways to surround Dak Prescott with more receiving options, whether it's by drafting one in the 1st round or getting somebody in free agency. And this year specifically, there are a number of free agent receivers that are fairly affordable that also can fit into the timeline of the Dallas Cowboys. You're looking at Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, a guy like Keenan Allen makes some sense. Darius Slayton was out there. Obviously, T. Higgins probably out the pay range, but somebody along those lines. And yes, the Dallas Cowboys are reportedly in on the Cooper Kupp sweepstakes, but I've heard some recent reports from Adam Schefter that the Dallas Cowboys are likely not going to bring in Cooper Kupp. So I'm assuming they're going to try to potentially bring in Stephon Diggs. We'll see if that actually does happen. But if that does happen, it's a temporary solution for an issue that I think is a big time problem. Now, there were also reports a few weeks ago that Dallas was interested in drafting a receiver in round 1. So hypothetically speaking, if they can get a Tetero McMillan or a Matthew Golden, maybe this solves the issue a tad bit, but I don't think that Dallas is being aggressive enough in trying to surround Dak Prescott with legitimate weapons. This offense was at its best when they had a healthy Michael Gallup, a healthy CeeDee Lamb, and a healthy Amari Cooper. Oh, and by the way, Amari Cooper's a free agent, and I haven't heard Dallas have any interest in him, which is kind of bizarre to me. So instead of actually trying to surround Dak Prescott with legitimate weapons who can actually move this offense forward into the next couple years, you instead bring in a RB2 in Javonte Williams, a RB3 in Miles Sanders. You haven't brought in a single wide receiver to help CeeDee Lamb. Instead, you doubled down on what you already have by bringing back Kevontae Turpin, who I think is a hell of a returner and a good receiver. But again, you haven't brought in anybody yet. Oh, and the offensive line that we haven't talked about yet, yeah, it's not very good right now. I don't know if this will be the starting five when we get to actual day one of camp, but Tyler Guyton at left tackle had an up and down rookie season. Tyler Smith is a total superstar. The fact they haven't gotten his contract done is just ridiculous to me. Cooper Beebe showed a lot of flashes last year. They brought in Rob Jones, who potentially could be their starter, but I have a feeling probably won't be. And then Terrence Steele at right tackle. This Cowboys offensive line went from being one of the best all the way back in like 2016 to, I would say it's one of the worst offensive lines in the NFC. Unless Tyler Guyton takes a big step forward, which he was a developmental tackle prospect, so there is a chance that he does potentially take a nice step forward. But if he doesn't take that step forward, then I don't feel confident about either of your tackles. I actually thought the Cowboys would cut Terrence Steele, but they still have him on the roster. Now, hypothetically speaking, they could draft a Will Campbell or a Kelvin Banks or an Armand Membu, and I think that would be a massive upgrade for this offensive line. But it's a young unit with a lot of developmental pieces, like, you know, a Guyton, like a Cooper Beebe. In some ways, Terrence Steele is still developing. So this is a younger offensive line, which if you do want to go that route, I feel like you need to surround your young offensive linemen with guys who can legitimately play. And you do have Tyler Smith, but I mean, I don't feel very confident about Robert Jones if he has to start. Yes, you have Brock Hoffman, who I've heard some reports that he could potentially play center, and they move Cooper Beebe to right guard. I still don't feel confident in that offensive line, though I will say this, as the season went on last year, it felt like the offensive line got better, and that was in the absence of Zach Martin, so we'll have to wait and see on this offensive line. I would not be opposed to them taking a Kelvin Banks and then moving Guyton out to right tackle and then just simply cutting Terrence Steele. Or if you really want to, you could take, if Will Campbell somehow falls to you, you could take Will Campbell, stick him in at right guard, and just feel pretty confident about that. All in all, I'm not really liking what I'm seeing from this offensive line moving forward. And then we get to the defense here. Now, the defense it's updated in some ways, but they haven't really updated the defensive line. Like guys like Peyton Turner, Marshawn Neal, and Sam Williams will probably play opposite of Micah Parsons. So Tyrus Wheat is the starter via ESPN, but that's not actually going to happen. Listen, this defense is not very good right now. You lose Jordan Lewis, who was your starting nickelback. So now you're possibly starting Kaiir Elam in that spot. Maybe you start Kalen Carson, who showed some flashes last year. Andrew Booth, who was another first-round bust that you decided to take a flyer on, maybe you could fill in that role, or Josh Butler. I know he showed some flashes. So listen, a starting healthy duo of Deron Bland and Trevon Diggs is obviously ideal, and both those guys you feel really confident in to not only create turnovers and make big splashy plays, but to be solid in coverage. But neither one of those guys has been consistently healthy these past few years, and honestly last year I thought that, you know, when they were healthy they weren't really playing that well. Now granted, they were coming off of injuries, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but I don't know, both these players are injury prone. They haven't played well. Deron Bland, by the way, needs a contract. Trevon Diggs is already in the middle of his contract, so it's going to be really interesting to see how they work that out. Then you have your safety duo of Donovan Wilson and Malik Hooker. This has been the duo for the past like 3-4 years now, and I don't think it's a bad duo, but I do think it could potentially use an upgrade. Malik Hooker's a fantastic free safety for this team, but Donovan Wilson showed a lot of, you know, really bad plays last year, so I would not be opposed to seeing them draft a safety in this year's draft class to potentially replace Donovan Wilson. The front seven has gotten a little bit of some juice from free agency, bringing in Kenneth Murray Jr., bringing in Jack Sanborn, bringing in Peyton Turner, bringing in Solomon Thomas. My issue with this is that, again, I just don't see enough difference makers here. Like, yes, you brought in potentially 2 different starters to add to your linebacking core, and I like the Jack Sanborn move. I think that he could play a good role for this team. But then there's Kenneth Murray, who, if you guys know anything about Kenneth Murray, this guy he's just kind of a wild man out there. Like, he will make some huge splashy plays that make you go, that's the first round guy that was drafted out of Oklahoma to, what was it, the Chargers? Don't quote me on that. I believe it was the Chargers. And everyone believed that this guy was going to be a future star in the NFL because he can make those superstar splashy plays here and there. But man, he gets out of position so easily. Play action, RPOs, in coverage. Like, he is just a complete liability out there. He's somebody who can get you close to 100 tackles a season because he is just a tackling machine. And I think he's really solid in run defense. But again, man, if this guy, he's going to need some development. I do think the Cowboys have a system, though, where, you know, when they're fully healthy, they're going to have DeMarvion Overshown back there, who showed a lot of big-time flashes. And I think if he comes back 100%, is a future superstar. Morris LaFau also showed some flashes last year. So I do think that they will have 4 capable bodies in the linebacking room. And maybe you can take Kenneth Murray out on like obvious passing downs, or, you know, whenever he's just having a bad game, you can replace him out there. But I don't know. Trading draft capital for Kenneth Murray, I didn't love the move. I don't hate the move because, again, they didn't have any linebackers. Quite frankly, they were potentially starting guys like Damone Clark, who has been a future or a starter for them in the past, but wasn't really good for them. They also had Buddy Johnson there too, and Morris LaFau. So at least they have some capable bodies now, but I don't think they're long-term answers, at least not at the immediate right now. I mean, Morris LaFau, DeMarvion Overshown, those are your long-term answers. We'll have to wait and see if this duo of Jack Sanborn and Kenneth Murray can actually make some plays for them. And then we get to the front four. Again, I do think that right now, if I had to guess who the starting edge rusher opposite of Micah would be, I'm going to assume it's going to be Marshawn Nealand, who was their second-round pick from last year, who was injured throughout the season, but showed a lot of good flashes of run defense and being able to get to the quarterback here and there. Sam Williams, I believe, tore his ACL the year prior, so I hope that he potentially can come in there and give this defense a little bit of juice. He was also a former second-round pick. Don't quote me on this. I believe he comes from Ole Miss. A couple of good plays early on into his career, but then again, last year dealt with an injury. So you lose DeMarcus Lawrence. You're hoping that Marshawn Nealand, Peyton Turner, and Sam Williams can kind of fill in those roles. You also lost Chauncey Golston and a lot of the other guys who played some big-time minutes for you last year because of how injured this defensive line was. You brought back Osa Odighizuwa on a fantastic deal, by the way. Like, this guy's getting paid as, like, I believe the 15th or 14th highest paid interior defensive tackle, but I think there's a good argument to be made that he's one of the better defensive tackles out there. I mean, he was, I want to say, second of all interior defensive linemen in terms of getting pressure on quarterbacks. Compare that to like Milton Williams, who has a 43 defense grade and got paid like $6 million more than Osa Odighizuwa. So I think the Cowboys made a good move there. I like that move a lot. But you haven't surrounded Osa with what he needs. He needs a big, burly, physical defensive tackle who can just stuff the run. Mazi Smith was supposed to be that guy who they drafted in, 2023 in the first round. And so far, it's just not been very good. Via PFF, he has an overall grade of 34.8, a run defense grade of 35.9, a pass rush grade of 49.6, 30 solo tackles, 2 sacks, 10 assisted tackles, had 524 snaps and just wasn't very good. And he wasn't much better in 2023 either. His rookie season, he had a 49.8 overall grade, a 70.3 pass rush grade, which, do not get it twisted, this guy is not a good pass rusher. I just think it's maybe a product of Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. And a run defense grade of 34.9. I mean, again, 34.9 rookie season, 35.9 in run defense grade this year. This was somebody who was supposed to be that big physical, monster up the middle who just eats up space and clogs lanes, and he's been the polar opposite of it. Now, I think he showed some flashes last year. Again, I'm not going to sit here and lie and pretend like I've watched every single snap of Mazi Smith, but I have heard from a lot of different Cowboys fans and just various reports that Mazi Smith took a few steps forward last year in terms of progress. So if that is the case, then maybe this year could be his big breakout year in year 3, and it does look like Dallas is kind of banking on it because they didn't really fix the defensive tackle spot. I mean, yes, you brought in Solomon Thomas, but Solomon Thomas is also not very good against the run. He's probably better than Mazi Smith, but he's not that much better. So they're going to be banking on Mazi Smith to go out there and make some plays next year, because if not, maybe a guy like Kenneth Murray and Jack Sanborn and DeMarvion Overshown, when healthy, can kind of save this front seven, but it's not looking too good for that nose tackle room. Again, I would love to see them draft somebody in the second or third round, maybe even in the first round. Like, there's some good nose tackles in this class, and if you go out there and take a Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant, maybe a second round guy like Alfred Collins, or maybe a Deion Walker in the 4th or 5th round, I think that those could be nice additions to kind of give you somebody who can stuff the run, but I don't know. So all in all, I want to kind of go back to this point here. My point is this: the Cowboys were in a situation where they needed a strong free agency class to surround Dak Prescott, surround their new head coach with all the necessary pieces to put together a functional offense and defense. The Cowboys are in a division where the Commanders have now surpassed them, which is crazy to say. The Eagles just won a Super Bowl off the backs of an aggressive free agency where they went out there and took Saquon Barkley. The Cowboys are actively watching the Commanders do those things by bringing in Deebo Samuel, Laramie Tunsil, trading for Marshawn Lattimore next year. Like, they are aggressive. They're going for it. Hell, even the New York Giants, I think, are maybe at this point arguably a better roster than the Dallas Cowboys, because they're bringing in guys like a new cornerback in Paulson Adebo. You bring in Javon Holland. If they could just get the quarterback situation right, I kind of have a feeling that Dallas could go from being, you know, one of the best teams in the NFC East to maybe the worst in the NFC East, because again, I mean, just look at what they've done so far. You're bringing an RB2, you're bringing a bad offensive lineman, you're bringing a first round bust, you're bringing Jack Sanborn, you're bringing a terrible deal in Miles Sanders, who's not a good player, Kaiir Elam, first round bust, Kenneth Murray, arguably first round bust, Solomon Thomas, first round bust. And again, I like some of the moves they've made, like the Osa Odigizua deal, and I'm not also advocating for them to go out there and overspend on different free agents. And this kind of brings me to my last point of this video. The Cowboys restructured the deals of Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. What was the point of restructuring those contracts if you weren't going to have an aggressive free agency? In case you don't know, when you restructure a deal, you're essentially opening up cap space for that offseason and pushing the money backwards in future years by like adding void years and stuff like that. So for a quarterback like Dak Prescott, who's now into his 30s now and probably only has less than 8-9 years left in him, why are you pushing back his contract to restructure his deal just to not have an aggressive free agency? The whole point in doing that, the whole reason why the Eagles were doing it, the whole reason why you see teams with rookie quarterbacks being super aggressive in restructuring deals, is because you can open up cap space in the immediate to bring in key veterans, to bring in key role players, maybe bring in a couple big time splashes here and there. And the Cowboys were primed in position to make those moves by restructuring those deals, and they haven't even done any of that yet. Oh, and by the way, they haven't extended their extension candidates like Micah Parsons, who should be extended like immediately. They also haven't extended DeRon Bland. Tyler Smith needs a contract. I mean, these are key guys who need massive contracts, but Dallas is refusing to do it, and I just don't know why. You have the money. Like, Dallas has, I believe, like $30-40 million in open cap space right now, but they're not spending money. And again, I'm not advocating for them to overspend on a guy like Milton Williams, you know, who got $20-something million. I'm not advocating for that. But what I am advocating for is for some level of aggression, some level of desperation out of this Cowboys team and out of this Cowboys front office to try to get this team back into contention for the NFC East. Because frankly, I look at this Cowboys team, and if we assume that the Giants hit gold on a quarterback, whether it's by, I don't know, getting Russell Wilson or drafting Shador or Cam Ward and those guys working out, this Cowboys team could easily go from being one of the best teams in the NFC to becoming one of the worst teams out there, because they're so unbelievably top heavy with guys like Dak, CD, Micah, Trevon, DeRon, so on and so forth. But then those supplementary role players that you're supposed to find in free agency, Dallas is not finding those guys, and they're not developing their draft picks to, you know, fill in those spots. So I look at this Cowboys team. I think the future is unbelievably bleak at this point. They're an older roster with a lot of really good players on it, but it feels like they're getting wasted by the greed and ego of Jerry Jones. I mean, Jerry Jones' refusal to be aggressive is just, in my opinion, ridiculous at this point. Last year, they hardly signed anybody. This year, they've signed players, but it's almost as if they're, you know, kind of just saying, here, Cowboys fans, here's a signing for you to be happy, but none of the signings are particularly good. And again, they're taking risks on first-round busts who potentially could work out, but I think they'd be lucky to find, you know, if any of them could end up being really good players for them. I mean, again, Solomon Thomas, Kaiir Elam, Kenneth Murray, guys like that, like those first-round bust types of guys, they've been given opportunities and they haven't shown it, and now Dallas is giving them another opportunity, and I guarantee you it's not going to work out for them, and we're going to see a repeat of what we saw last year, where Dallas gets blown out by certain teams and beats up on other teams, but in totality ends up with like a 12th, 13th, 14th overall pick in the draft. So in my opinion, Dallas is heading down the wrong path. They better hope that Dak Prescott can, you know, make do with what he's got. I also hope that Dallas just makes like one or two splashy moves with the leftover money. They still have time, and there are a few players still available, so we'll wait and see on that one, but I'm not thinking it's going to happen. I don't think they're going to get Cooper Kupp. I'd be a little surprised if they enter the Stephon Diggs sweepstakes. I kind of feel like this is probably it for the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe a few moves around the edges, but yeah, I mean, this Cowboys team isn't very good, and I don't think it's getting much better.